The three white racists who chased and murdered Ahmaud Arbery have been sentenced to life in prison, with a judge denying any chance of parole for the father and son who armed themselves and initiated the deadly pursuit of the 25-year-old black man. This was what happened today in court.
That said, with regard to the sentence in this case, as to Travis McMichael, Mr. McMichael, the court sentences you as follows. Count 1, malice murder, life without the possibility of parole. Count 2, felony murder, is vacated by operation of law. Count 3, felony murder, vacated by operation of law. Count 4, felony murder, vacated by operation of law. Count 5, felony murder, vacated by operation of law. Count 6, aggravated assault, merges into count 1. Count 7, aggravated assault. The court sentences the defendant to 20 years consecutive to count 1. Count 8, false imprisonment, merges into count 1. Count 9, attempted false imprisonment, 5 years concurrent to count 7. That is life plus 20. Greg McMichael, the court sentences you as follows. Count 1, malice murder, defendant was found not guilty. Count 2, felony murder, life without the possibility of parole. Count 3, felony murder, vacated. When I say vacated, it's vacated by operation of law in all cases. I'm not going to repeat it. Count 4, vacated. Count 5, vacated. Count 6 merges into count 2. Count 7, aggravated assault, 20 years consecutive to count 2. Count 8, 10 years concurrent to count 7. Count 9, 5 years concurrent to count 7. That is life plus 20 years. Roddie, Bryan, I do want to separate a little bit because the state is making a different recommendation. And despite the back and forth that Mr. Goff and I had during this case, I do want to point out a couple things that he raised that I think are appropriate to raise with regard to the sentence. As far as the remorse, I think Roddie Bryan stands in very different shoes. It is obvious from the beginning that he questioned the tragedy that had occurred at the scene and was on, I believe, I can't remember whose body cam, but the body cam, in fact, questioning whether or not what had occurred, and then took steps early on in this process, I think, that demonstrated that he had grave concerns that what had occurred should not have occurred. And I think that does make Mr. Bryan's situation a little bit different. However, Mr. Bryan has been convicted of felony murder. And I do not believe it can be disputed based on the facts of this case, that the verdict was an appropriate verdict based upon the evidence presented, at least. And when I say appropriate, what I mean is legal. Because I believe there's been some discussion about some differences between Mr. Bryan and the McMichaels. There may be some differences, but it does not change the fact that was it not for the fact that Mr. Bryan used his vehicle in a way to impede Mr. Arbery's course of travel, this may not have ever occurred, and that is sufficient for felony murder. He did cooperate with law enforcement. I will point out Mr. Goff, 1710(1)B. There's actually a case out of Chatham County that says it would not apply under the circumstances of this case. So the court, recognizing that Mr. Bryan's position is different, again, Mr. Bryan was found not guilty on count 1 and count 2. The court sentences Mr. Bryan to life with the possibility of parole on count 3. Count 4 is vacated. Count 5 is vacated. Count 6, the defendant was found not guilty. Count 7 merges into count 3. The defendant is sentenced to 10 years consecutive to count 3 on count 8 and 5 years concurrent with count 8. Both of those counts, though, will be suspended sentences, which gives Mr. Bryan a life with the possibility of parole sentence. Those are the sentences, the court having pronounced sentence. First, with regard to Travis McMichael. Mr. McMichael, You are hereby notified that under the law of Georgia, you are entitled to appeal the guilty verdict of the jury, and if you decide to do so, you must file your appeal within 30 days of this date.
Prior to being sentenced, the Arbery family had an opportunity to speak to the court about the death of their son.
This verdict doesn't bring you back, but it does help bring closure to this very difficult chapter of my life. I made a promise to you. Today, I laid you to rest. I told you I love you, and someday, somehow, I would get you justice. Son, I love you as much today as I did today that you were born. Raising you was the honor of my life, and I'm very proud of you. Your Honor, these men have chose to lie and attack my son and his surviving family. They each have no remorse and do not deserve any leniency. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or mistaken fact. They chose to target my son because they didn't want him in their community.
It's a hard time for me and my family. You know, something that I just doesn't sit right with me at this time. The man who killed my son has sat in this courtroom every single day next to his father. I'll never get that chance to sit next to my son ever again. Not at a dinner table, not at a holiday. And not at a wedding. He'll never get to have I pray that no one in this courtroom ever has to do what we had did, that buried their child.
Of course, they could have gotten the death penalty as well, but the judge chose to sentence them again to life in prison without parole. Bryan, of course, does have a possibility of parole because he showed far more remorse and actually cooperated to more than the other two individuals. Joining us right now is Matt Manning, civil rights attorney. We have Kelly Bethea, communication strategist, also Michael Imhotep, host of African History Network. Matt, the judge opened this up by taking a moment of silence of 1 minute to say that was a portion of the time Ahmaud Arbery was running for his life. It was a total of 5 minutes. As I listened to him, and then he read back the comments of Gregory and Travis McMichael. As he was doing that, I'm sitting here going, this judge is not going to play with these guys here. He clearly gave them essentially almost max penalty.
That's exactly right, Roland. And in the state of Georgia, a judge has a lot of latitude to determine whether someone's going to get parole or not get parole, you know, on a homicide case. And I thought Judge Walmsley did a magnificent job of delineating a number of the comments. I mean, the fact that Mr. McMichael likened Mr. Arbery to a rat and talked about him being trapped like an animal underscores precisely what these men thought. They dehumanized them, and I think the judge was spot on, not only in his sentencing, but in delineating all of those quotes, because frankly, you know, there are going to be people who say that he bent to the pressure and his sentence is representative of you know, liberals and all these other people who are angry about this. But the reality is this was a callous murder. And they said as much in their statements to the police, and he went through each one of those methodically. So I thought he did a wonderful job with that, and I thought that this sentence was definitely reflective of the evidence. So I'm very, very pleased with the outcome.
Michael?
Yeah, Roland, you know, I watched it live today, and when Judge Walmsley started out with 1 minute of silence to show how long 1 minute was, and Ahmaud Arbery ran for his life for 5 minutes, I knew he was going to lower the boom on him. So, I think the sentencing was correct. I also thought that William Roddie Bryan would get a little lesser of a sentence. So he got life in prison with the possibility of parole, while the other two got life in prison without the possibility of parole. So, this is, I think this is a good sentencing, and we continue to fight this battle.
Kelly.
I agree with the panelist. In my opinion, justice was certainly served here because Ahmaud Arbery should be among the living right now. And it's a result of three racist white men who did not think that a black man belonged in their vicinity. And that is the only reason that Ahmaud Arbery is dead today. What I was able to see today out of the hearing, the victim impact statements were certainly the takeaways for me. Something about victim impact statements that a lot of people maybe just kind of take for granted is that the victim being Ahmaud Arbery, he's not the only victim in this case. It's the rest of his family that have to bear the burden of grief for the rest of their lives as a result of these three men. And when the mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, said, "I wish he had cut and cleaned his toenails," when he went out on the jog that day. I could have burst into tears right there because the fact that a lawyer would have stooped so low and have been so unethical in her closing to say such horrendous, derogatory things about a victim. I don't care how hard you go for your client, that was just beyond the pale to me. So the fact that the mother still had enough gumption to clap back, if you will, to that attorney and all of her vile. Just kudos to Wanda Cooper Jones and having her head held high in that regard, as well as Ahmaud Arbery's sister commenting on how his skin glistened in the sun. That is how I want Ahmaud Arbery remembered across the board, nationally, internationally, as opposed to the horrific details of the last 5 minutes of his life.
Was also, I thought was interesting here was the fact that we're not at this point if Bryan doesn't and his attorneys don't release that video. It was 3 months after the fact. You had multiple prosecutors who were covering up for them who declined to prosecute. They released the video. The mother was putting pressure. The father was putting pressure. The family and the attorneys were putting pressure for action. Bryan and his attorney then released the video thinking that was going to exonerate him. Mm-hmm. And it was that video which led to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation getting involved, which led to that happening, which led to them being indicted, them being convicted. So Bryan is gonna spend a lot of time in prison, life with a possibility of parole, for video him and his lawyers released. Matt?
Yeah. Well, his lawyers made a very, very bad strategic mistake, but it was in the support of justice, right? So ultimately, thankfully, they made that mistake because otherwise this may not have been brought to light the way it was. There were people advocating, but, video evidence is the best evidence. And I think that's very important, especially because Judge Walmsley, again, when sentencing Mr. Bryan, talked about how he used his vehicle in the commission of this crime. So had they been a little smarter in their strategy, he may not be sitting there at the table, at least not indicted. But I'm glad that they released that video so he, too, could be held to account for his crimes.
Michael?
Roland, as Tiffany Cross would say, the caucasity of it. So you actually think this video of Ahmaud Arbery being hunted down and executed, you think this is going to absolve you? This is, and it's important for us to understand this in the context of Georgia. Georgia is the state that has the largest Confederate monument anywhere in this country. It's called Stone Mountain. And the 1863 Georgia fugitive slave law that turned into this citizen's arrest law that they concocted after the fact, that was specifically designed for fugitive runaway slaves running away from Georgia plantations when Georgia was part of the Confederacy, running behind Union lines. It was targeting them. Okay, so just to think that this video of Ahmaud being executed is somehow going to absolve William Roddie Bryan is just shows how stupid these people are.
Absolutely, Kelly. But again, thankfully, and it's unfortunate that if we didn't have that video, we're probably not here.
I mean, thank God for video, right? But also thank God for the shift in legal culture being that Black people deserve justice as well. Because if you just look at the optics of this entire case, you had a white prosecutor, white judge, white attorneys on the defense. If I'm not mistaken, majority white jury, and everything, maybe not even 20 years ago, had this case been tried 20 years ago, we would have had a very different result, even with all the evidence laid out. So the fact that we are now in a culture that is shifting, it is not perfect by any means, but it is shifting in the direction towards justice for everyone, which is really what the law is supposed to do in the first place. The irony being that these laws were not meant for Black people to thrive in, and yet here we are getting justice anyway.
Back to that Roland Martin unfiltered video in just one moment.
Time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way.
Honored to be on a show that you own. A Black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Like, wow, Roland was amazing on there.
Stay Black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
You dig?